1944, somewhere in Europe, German intelligence is tracking a massive American force. 30,000 soldiers, hundreds of tanks, artillery columns stretching for miles. Radio transmissions confirm it. Scout reports confirm it. Everything confirms it. There's just one problem. None of it is real. This is the story of the 23rd Headquarters Special Troops. The Ghost Army. 1,100 men whose entire job was to pretend to be 30,000. And the most extraordinary thing about them was who they were. Not hardened combat veterans. Not special forces operators. Artists. Painters. Actors. Sound engineers. Architects. Recruited specifically from the finest art schools in America. Because the U.S. Army had realized something nobody had ever tried before. That in the right hands, deception could win battles that bullets never could. It started in 1944. The Allied invasion of Europe was underway, but the Germans were smart. They tracked American unit movements obsessively. They had intelligence networks, radio intercept teams, and experienced commanders who could read a battlefield like a map. Moving real forces around Europe without the Germans noticing was nearly impossible. So the Americans decided to stop trying to hide and start lying instead. The Ghost Army was given 3 weapons: rubber, sound, and theater. The rubber came first. Inflatable tanks, inflatable artillery pieces, inflatable trucks and jeeps and half-tracks, each one carefully designed to look from the air exactly like the real thing. A team of men could drive to an empty field, unload a truck, spend 2 hours pumping up equipment, and suddenly from any German reconnaissance plane flying overhead, there was an entire armored division sitting in that field. They could pack the whole division back into the truck and be gone before morning. They moved these fake units constantly, setting up, breaking down, repositioning, creating the illusion of massive force movements across hundreds of miles of European countryside. German commanders watched entire Phantom divisions maneuver across their maps and rerouted their real panzer divisions to respond to ghosts. But rubber alone wasn't enough. A sharp German observer on the ground might get close enough to notice something was wrong. So the Ghost Army added sound. They had enormous speakers, some of the most powerful ever built at that point, mounted on half-tracks. These speakers could broadcast recordings of tank columns moving, troops marching, equipment being unloaded at volumes loud enough to be heard 15 miles away. Sound engineers had spent months recording every sound an armored division made, every engine note, every track squeal, every shouted order, and had mixed them into seamless recordings that could run for hours. At night, they would drive to the edge of a position and simply play the recordings into the darkness. German listening posts miles away would hear an entire armored column moving into position and report it as confirmed enemy activity. There was nothing there. Then came the theater, and this was where the artists truly went to work. Ghost Army soldiers were given the uniforms, markings, and insignia of whatever real American unit they were impersonating that week. They would drive into nearby towns in those uniforms, go to coffee shops and bars, talk loudly about their unit's movements, complain about their commanding officers by fake name, discuss operations in voices just loud enough for locals to overhear. They knew that German intelligence had informants in every town. Every word was a calculated lie delivered like a casual truth. Some Ghost Army soldiers became so good at this that they were essentially running one-man theater performances every time they walked into a room. The radio operators were perhaps the most skilled of all. Every real American radio operator had what was called a fist, a personal rhythm and style to the way they sent Morse code, as individual as a fingerprint. German radio intercept teams had been listening to American operators for months and had cataloged those fists. They knew which operator belonged to which unit. So when the Ghost Army impersonated a real division, they didn't just use that division's frequencies and call signs. They studied recordings of the real operator's Morse code style and mimicked it precisely. German intercept teams listening and heard the exact same operator they had been tracking for months in the exact same style, reporting from a completely different location. The deception went all the way down to the fingerprints of how a man's hand moved. Their first major operation was in the summer of 1944 near the town of Brest in France. A real American unit needed to pull out of position to reinforce another section of the front. If the Germans noticed the gap, they would pour through it. The Ghost Army moved in. Inflatable tanks went up. Speakers ran through the night. Fake unit markings appeared on vehicles driving through nearby towns. Real German forces on the other side of that line held their position for days, waiting for an American assault from a division that existed only in the imagination of 1,100 artists with a truck full of rubber and a very good sound system. They did this 21 times across France, Luxembourg, and Germany. Each operation different. Each one tailored to the specific tactical situation. Sometimes they were impersonating armored divisions. Sometimes infantry. Sometimes they were creating a fake headquarters to make the Germans think the main Allied command had moved when it hadn't. Once they impersonated two different divisions simultaneously in positions 20 miles apart, convincing German intelligence that they were completely encircled by American forces when in reality the entire area was almost undefended. The risks were real. They were 1,100 men pretending to be 30,000. If the Germans ever called the bluff and actually attacked, they had almost nothing to defend themselves with. On several occasions, German patrols came close enough that the Ghost Army had to scramble to look like a real fighting force with whatever they actually had, which was almost nothing. One operation nearly fell apart when a German observation plane flew low over their position at exactly the wrong moment. The men on the ground held perfectly still beside their rubber tanks and waited. The plane circled once, then flew away. Nobody ever knew what the German pilot saw or what he reported. There were casualties. Some Ghost Army men were killed, others wounded. Living a lie in a combat zone while being desperately under-equipped was not a safe existence. But the number of lives their deceptions saved by pulling German forces away from real Allied positions, by buying time for real divisions to maneuver, by creating confusion in German command at critical moments, is incalculable. Military historians have estimated that their operations may have saved tens of thousands of American lives. And then the war ended. The Ghost Army was disbanded. And here is the part that makes the whole story almost impossible to believe. Their existence was classified top secret. These men went home to America and could tell nobody. Not their wives. Not their families, not their friends. The painters went back to painting. The architects went back to architecture. The actors went back to whatever stages they could find. For 50 years, they sat at dinner tables and family gatherings while people thanked real veterans around them and said nothing. Some of them became famous. Ellsworth Kelly went on to become one of the most celebrated American artists of the 20th century. Bill Blass became one of America's most legendary fashion designers. They had both spent the war running elaborate deceptions across occupied Europe, and neither of them could say a word about it for decades. The Ghost Army was declassified in 1996. By then, most of the men were in their 70s and 80s. Some had already died without ever being able to tell the story. The ones who were still alive finally got to explain to their grandchildren what they had actually done during the war. Not fought with guns. Fought with paint brushes and speakers and rubber tanks, and the oldest weapon in the history of warfare. The lie told well enough to be believed. 1,100 men, 21 operations, 0 Hollywood films. Until now,